Welcome to the Your Entrepreneurship School podcast, or as I like to call it, the Yes Podcast. My name is Britta Moreta. I'm an executive business consultant for women who dream of living wildly and wealthy abroad. The Yes Podcast is for women who are ready to build a business that funds her dream life abroad so she can expand her business, bank account, and brilliance without settling for a life that tames her wildness. The Yes Podcast is sponsored by Bridal Babes Yoga, a luxe start to your celebration. Ready to elevate your bachelorette or hen-do weekend with something truly unforgettable? My Bridal Babes Yoga experiences are crafted with intention, movement, and connection because you deserve more than just the usual. Immerse yourself in a soulful, joy-filled session designed exclusively for you and your crew. Whether you crave a restorative morning flow, a themed class with playful energy, or a heart-centered practice to set powerful intentions for this next chapter, we'll curate a dreamy experience that feels as radiant and one-of-a-kind as your love story. What to expect? Thoughtfully curated playlist, essential oil-infused head massage, a pause to breathe, move, laugh, and connect with the optional add-ons of tarot card reading, astrology chart reading, and friendship bracelet making. This isn't just a yoga class. It's a radiant start to your weekend, an unforgettable moment of luxurious relaxation and joy before the confetti. Let's make magic for your bridal crew. To book a Bridal Babes yoga class, you can go to brittamoreta.com/bridal-babes-yoga or find our link in the show notes. Welcome to the Yes Podcast, Raquel. I'm so happy that you are here. For those of you who don't know, this is Raquel Batista. She is my first friend in Portugal who I met years ago. We were both starting, yes, I love the heart hands. We were both starting our businesses in Portugal. And Raquel, I don't say this lightly, is a genius when it comes to business and the legalities of it in Portugal. So welcome, Raquel. I would love for you to further introduce yourself.
Thank you, my queen. You exaggerate, of course, but yes, it was such a serendipity moment when we first met, and we were really the both of us starting out. And of course, if it hadn't been for you, I hadn't started with the talks. I hadn't, you were the one pushing me, and because it was you, I went to the talks, and it was magic when we were both working together. I don't think anyone believed that we hadn't met each other like years ago. So I am a lawyer. I have a law degree. I specialize in finance. I have over 20 years of experience in the banking industry and high finance, investment funds, asset management, all that. And by the time I was pregnant with my third daughter, I just left the corporate world. It wasn't a good mix anymore. I think the higher you go, the worse it gets, and it just wasn't for me anymore. I wanted to have more time with my family. And then I opened Lighthouse Consulting, but at the time I really didn't know if my expertise was even worth anything. I mean, I thought I didn't know anything. And then some friends just told me, no, look, you have your legal expertise, you have your professional experience, all of those years looking at business plans at companies and all of that. And I'm fluent in English. And so there's no gap there, which is very important when you're talking about technical things. And, I opened the company. I didn't know how it would go. And we met, and you remember, I mean, I was so hesitant about so much. I didn't even know what exactly I was going to do. And meanwhile, over the years, I guess there was a kind of a channeling to business. Of course, I do some real estate as well, but for clients that ask me, and visas as well for clients that ask me. But mainly it's about businesses, creating companies, business consulting, business brokerage, all of that. And I'm very happy. I have the dream life that I wrote about 10 years ago. Clearly, I manifested that. I just saw the notebook that I used, and I was like, oh my God, this is what I asked for. But I didn't even remember it. So here I am, and I have to really really thank you for bringing me on to this podcast. Sorry, I have a 2 months old puppy, and she was trying to get on the couch. She's not allowed on the couch yet. But so thank you, and I'm very grateful to be here. Very honored, and thank you so much, my queen, always to invite me to these things.
Well, I'm so happy to have you here today. For those of you who are listening, Raquel is your girl if you want to open a business in Portugal. And today we're going to speak a little bit about opening the brick and mortar side of a wellness space, whether it's a Pilates studio, a yoga studio, a dance studio, a gym, like a retreat center, hotel. Raquel not only has experience with opening the business, she has experience in the legality side. I used to have a yoga studio in Portugal, and Raquel was my go-to woman for all things taxes, legalities, what I needed to have in my space. And I specifically went to her because she knows what she's doing. She knows the law like the back of her hand. So if you're thinking about moving abroad to Portugal and you want to open a business, but you have no idea how to do that, Raquel is your girl. And because this is the Yes Podcast, Yoga Entrepreneurship School, I always ask, Raquel, what are you saying yes to today or yes to in your life and your business?
Now, and because it's been 3 years and there's been a lot of different stages, now I am saying yes to balance and to giving grace to myself. When I need some periods, I had a nose surgery. My daughter had this dental treatment. We went on a trip, and I'm giving myself grace to not like stress out like hell when I'm not, working in those periods, because I used to be like, oh my God, I have to be working all the time. And part of being an entrepreneur is the fact that you can control your own time. But when you're not working, you really have to set your mind that you are allowed to relax and to enjoy the time with your family and not think about other things. And so I'm saying yes to balance and to being graceful with myself and allowing myself to the space as well to fulfill my needs.
I love that. And as a fellow entrepreneur, I really understand like giving yourself permission to take time off, which is the hardest thing in the world because we love our businesses, we love our clients. And if we could, I think we would generously work all the time. And that's just it's not feasible. So I love that you are saying yes to balance. That is so beautiful. And as a yoga teacher, we teach so many balance poses. And something I always teach my students is like when you're in a balance pose, it is so normal to fall over, to fall off, to knock other people over. And it's the same in life. And that's what yoga teaches us. Like how we show up on our mat is how we show up in life. Um, it's just the truth. I'm like, I'm not going to feel bad if I accidentally fall off my mat. It's not the end of the world. I want us to dive into the legalities of, first of all, if I was someone, let's say, living in the United States or living in Canada or the UK, and I want to have a business with a country that has warmer weather, of course, I'm going to look into Portugal. And the first thing I want to know is, in Portugal, we have companies and we have freelancers. If I want to open a space, which one do I need to do, the company or the freelancer, or can I do both?
You can do both. So there's no limitation on that. You need some kind of business structure underneath the business or the office or the space or the premises or whatever, or the shop. So you need some kind of business structure, but it can be either freelancing or a company. So there's no limitation on like freelancing, owning or renting a space and then having Pilates or yoga, whatever activity there. So you can do both. No worries. And you can create a company, not even setting foot in Portugal, which is, I think, important as well, and it ties with some a type of visa. You can be a shareholder of a company in Portugal. You don't have to be a resident, which is, I think, it's important also to say, because sometimes people are afraid of to come in and to take a lot of time to build their business. They can create their company right away and then start the visa process, and meanwhile the business is building. So I think that's important to say as well.
No idea that that's how it went because I showed up to Portugal and opened my company the first day I got there. So this is so great to know that before you even move to Portugal, or if you're a shareholder in someone else's company, you don't actually have to be in the country starting out. So that is excellent. And let's say, like, for example, I rented a studio in Portugal. Mine was very different. It was out of my home. I don't know if it was
It was
100. It was
beautiful
beautiful.
with a beautiful view.
It was. It had a Miradoro view. And for me, renting was much more feasible because it was my first 2 years of business. For Portugal, whether you're in Lisbon, whether you're in Cascais, the Algarve, what do you think the benefits are of like renting your business space versus owning it?
The first thing I would say is try to control your costs as much as possible because you're starting. So go one step at a time. One mistake that a lot of first time business owners do is they have this preconceived idea of what an entrepreneur is. Okay, I have to have a space, I have to have a desk, an assistant, and a space, and a computer, and this and that. And that's not true. I started Lighthouse Consulting with literally my computer that I already had. And at the first stages, you really want to control the costs so that as soon as you start to see the income coming in, then you can venture yourself to, further territories. And so I would even say that you don't even need to rent. So you can uh, temporarily rent some spaces in other gyms, in other spaces. So like just for some classes, you don't need to rent all the space out. Start out by giving classes somewhere, presenting yourself to other gyms, other spaces, and say, look, here I am. I want to start out. I want to be able to have a class here, and then test it out. So test the waters before, going in and being full on. Once you have your clientele and you know that it's a great business because they're regular, right? So it's not a one-off thing. Between renting and owning, it's kind of a commitment thing. So rent is much more flexible, because if you don't want the space, you can let it go. Whereas if you own the space, you really have to go to the trouble of selling or subleasing it or leasing it, right? So it's a matter of commitment and financial strength, let's say, that in in regards to what you have. I mean, if you have a lot of cash, investing in a property is always better because, renting, you're throwing your money away. You're not throwing away because it counts as an expense. But if you have the property, in principle goes up in value, and so you're better off financially. But the thing is, risk reward. And I always say, start slowly, start step by step. You'll get there. Don't be in a hurry to have like an empire right away. You'll get there, but it takes time. It takes development. And so even before renting, don't do anything. I have actually also a yoga teacher, and he's actually DJ as well. And I started out helping him being a freelancer. He doesn't have a space. He doesn't rent a space. He doesn't own a space. What he does is like for some times he goes and does classes, on the rooftop of whatever, for a period of time. And that's how he's doing. And I think that's the right way to start. And then from then on, you build your client portfolio, and then if you see that you have enough of an income, then rent.
I love this answer. This is exactly what I did. So when I moved to Portugal, my first year and a half, I lived in a studio apartment and I had an online yoga business, and I saved up as much money as I could. And then when I had enough money to find a space, and I rented the space, and it took me a year and a half, and I was so okay with that because I was just like getting my bearings in Portugal. I was creating community, working at hotels, teaching yoga. And then again, I had the clientele, I had enough money, and then I opened my space. And I am in so much of agreement with Raquel on this because one, it just takes time to acclimate yourself. Like if you're moving abroad to Portugal, it takes time to learn the language, which I think you should be in language classes your first year in Portugal. It takes time to just learn how business is run in Portugal versus other countries. It takes time to understand the currencies. There's just so much that needs to be done from a foundational standpoint in your first year of business. And then when you're ready to go build that empire, which is so exciting, it's like the day that you plant the seeds is not the day you eat the fruit. So in Portugal, like that fruit takes a long time to grow sometimes. So it's like plant the seeds and like be in community and get those clients, save up the money, and then go and open your dream space, whatever that is. And you also don't have to have a space. This is if you want to have one. And I think that's really important. I also want to talk a little bit about just the legality side of owning a space. So, for example, like if I am a company owner or a freelance. Like when I was in Portugal, by law, I had to have an accountant. Shout out to Pedro. We love him. We will hook you up if you want an excellent accountant. But like, what does that look like from a financial standpoint? What does that look like from a legality standpoint? Like, what do I need to present to Portugal to like show that, hey, I want to do this, and what's required of me?
Well, it's surprisingly simple to create a company in Portugal. You just need two things. You need NIF and your identification, which can be your passport. Again, you don't even need to be a resident to start your company in Portugal. As a freelancer, it's even easier in a sense because there's no commercial registry, registration. You just go on to the tax portal and you can do that online. It's very easy and it's free. To open a company, there's cost associated. And as you mentioned, for instance, when I help freelancers open their activity, I always demand that they have an accountant, even if it's not legally, mandatory. I always say, if you want to, if I'm going to register you as a freelancer, you show me who your accountant is going to be, because I am not going to allow you to be a freelancer without the accountant, because there is so much filing obligations month after month. It's Social Security, it's VAT, it's personal income tax. So, and you have to concentrate on your business. Let those things be handled by someone that, does that every day, knows a lot about the subject. And it can be very confusing because it can be very different from what it is in other countries. I mean, in the US, for instance, accountants, even in a company, they do like a 1 year, a one-off thing in a year. They just file your taxes that time in that year, and that's it. Whereas in Portugal, every month they have a lot of obligations of filing, of invoicing, of registering costs, of, cross-checking with your bank account, your expenses and your invoices and all of that. And so the role of an accountant in a company in Portugal is 1,000 times more important than with a company in the US. So it's not complicated, but it does require some steps, and it's not a lot of money. So if you want to be a freelancer, it's even free. If you want to create a company, there is a cost associated. Registries alone, it's around 500 euros. You can't go under that, and then you have to consider the accountant and, of course, the fees of whoever helps you to do that.
We were talking about like how you require people who work with you when you're registering them to have an accountant. And I really want to say that the best investment I ever made in my yoga studio
Yeah.
business in Portugal was hiring my accountant. I shared that his name was Pedro. We will put his details in the show notes. I'm someone, and I learned this the hard way, is that I really just like love people, and Pedro was my second accountant because the first one I hired someone who was really nice and they didn't do the job well. And Pedro and his team, they're very compassionate and they are no bullshit kind of team, which I really appreciate, people who get the job done well. And Raquel is so right when she says like NIF and VAT and Social Security. So NIF is the tax number in Portugal that every person has to have, whether you're Portuguese or you're not Portuguese and you're living there. And then that is the tax. And then Social Security, for me, when I owned a company in Portugal, is I had to pay I think I had to pay that every quarter, and then I had to pay Social Security every month. And Social Security, the price raises by like maybe 50 euros every year, so it's not bad. But for people who have no idea what this is, so like number one, when you're opening a company or a freelancing, you need an excellent accountant who can just get this done for you. And I tell you, it is the best thing you'll ever do for your business. So go do that. And then you're going to have this thing called NIF, which someone like Raquel or a lawyer can get that done for you. It literally takes 15 to 20 minutes for someone in Portugal who knows what they're doing. And then you're going to need a business bank account, which is different from a personal bank account. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like,
Yes.
Go
Yes,
ahead.
important point, Britta. Thank you. So when you create a company, it's a whole separate entity. Okay, it's like your baby. It's not you. It's a different entity. So it has its own name. It has its own tax number. It has its own social security number. It has its own address, and it has its own piggy bank to work with. So it's the share capital. So this when you create a company. Okay, so your business is a separate entity from yourself. Now you are the owner of that company, but it's a separate asset. It's a separate legal entity, separate everything. And so, in order for the company to operate like us, you're going to need a bank account because you're going to need to pay costs for the company, and you'll need to receive payments for the services that the company provides. So, what I usually say is if you already have a personal bank account in Portugal, use that bank to create your company bank account because all the compliance, know your customer, all of that is done. And you just need to give them, the commercial registry certificate and the RCB, which is, the beneficial ownership registration. So it's much better to open your bank account where you already have a relationship with your bank because it can be quite difficult. And more banks are like closing up on opening bank accounts for foreigners. And so if you happen to already have a personal bank account, go use that bank. And Britta, you were talking about the Social Security, and that's very important. And one of the things that is more taxing on the entrepreneurs here is the level of tax.
Yeah.
So, and it's not only tax, it's the social security part. And comparing with the US, this can be, quite a shock to have so much to pay in social security. And when you're a freelancer, the social security is charged on the average of the previous 3 months because your income can go up and down. It depends on the months. If it's a good month or not, your income may go up and down, and the social security has to be charged on the average of the previous 3 months. And so what happens is if you have three great months, but then the fourth month is not that good, you are slapped with a social security bill.
It's true.
And so be ready. And that's why an accountant is also, fundamental is you need to understand that the money that gets into your account is not 100% yours. You have to
Yeah.
consider that you have to pay social security. You have to consider that, if you're not exempt from VAT, you will have to pay VAT to the government. So the VAT is something that a lot of people don't really understand what it means, but the VAT, of course, it's a value added tax, is a tax on the final consumer. So it would be on your students. Your students, when they pay your invoice for a class, they have to pay like 23% of VAT. And so they are the ones that are paying the VAT. It's not you. They are. But you have the responsibility to take those 23% and deliver them or filing them or giving them to the government. So a lot of times people think it's a cost of the company. It's not. It's something that you charge your clients and you're responsible to then deliver to the government, which is a different thing. And then of course you can deduct expenses from the VAT that you have to deliver. So take into consideration that taxes are quite high in Portugal. There's a lot of filing obligations. Be aware that not everything that gets into your bank account can be used. So prepare, make budgets, financial planning, do a little bit of have a little bit of structure and a little bit of strategy because you will need that because you will have great months and you will have lousy months. And so when you have a company, for instance, that is, you can control that much better because uh, regardless of the income, you can pay yourself the same salary. If you pay yourself the same salary, the social security bill is going to be the same. And so you have a little bit more of cost control there. But the majority of people really start out as a freelancer, and it's important to say that for the first year you're exempt from social security. That's a big cost that you don't have. And of course, if you're under 15K a year, you will also be exempt of VAT. So it's just something that you don't even need to worry about.
Thank you for sharing this. And I want to break this down a little bit. So, if you're new to this, VAT is something that your clients pay. Like, let's say that I'm your client and I'm going to go take a yoga class at your studio because I'm the student. Your client, therefore I'm paying VAT. And then you are the business owner, so you are paying Social Security, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. So Social Security is not a tax. Social Security is a charge on businesses and on employees and everything that moves.
Yeah.
But that whose objective is to help people in time of need of unemployment and of course retirement and maternity leaves and sick leaves and all of that. So it's not a tax, it's a social aid. Remember, we're in a socialist country until now. So Social Security is very important, and everybody needs to contribute in the sense that then they will have protection with, again, unemployment, if they need to not work because they're ill, if they have a problem and they can't work anymore. Social Security will help them, with monthly payments. So it's very important. We can't just say, oh my God, there's so much cost having a business in Portugal. There is a cost, but then there's a lot of return because there's a lot of protection. And sometimes, especially people from the US say, "Oh my God, the taxes in Portugal are crazy." Corporate income tax is 20%, which I don't think is that high. And there's a lot of write-offs that you can make, of course, so a lot of deductions. But if you're talking about personal income tax, that can be a bit different because it's um, a progressive tax rate. So the more you earn, the more you're going to pay. And it's not that difficult to get to those higher brackets. And the higher bracket, it's 48%, around that.
Mhm.
And then you have to consider that you have Social Security on top. So more or less half of what you're working is going to go to these entities. But also you have to consider that, for instance, comparing to the US, uh, health insurance,
Yeah,
you don't need to have a health insurance, and if you do, it's gonna 100 euros or whatever a month. It's not 5,000 a month. So,
exactly.
you're saving that. You're paying Social Security, but you're saving that. When you go to a grocery store, the price that's there on the tag, it's the price that you pay. I always remember going to New York and fresh out of law school, we were in that finalist trip. We didn't have any money, and we went to some grocery shop or 7-Eleven or whatever it was, like with $20 or whatever. And we really did the math on what we could bring, and then we go to the register, and it's like a lot more, and we were like, man, how did we miss? What happened here? Because there was this tax, that you paid just at that moment. And that doesn't exist in Portugal. So the price tag that's there is what you're going to pay. Also, you have to consider that you can go to any public hospital and
Yeah,
you will, in any emergency, whatever it is, you will have medical care. And as you know, it's not the same in the US. And you won't pay for it. You don't need to pay for this. This is subsidized by Social Security, by taxes, by all of this. So when you compare, yes, taxes are a bit higher, but then there's a lot of things that you don't need to pay out of your own pocket as you do in the US. But what I really want to, make it clear is Social Security is not a tax. Okay, it's a socialist charge on income that every employee, every business owner has to pay. For instance, if you're an employee of a given company, you're going to pay 11% out of your own salary, and the company is going to pay 24.75. Okay, so
okay.
both the employer and the employee are responsible for paying Social Security, and that's going to go to your retirement, again, for unemployment, for if you have happen some if something happens and you cannot work anymore, all of that. But it's not a tax. When we're talking about tax, it's corporate income tax for companies and personal income tax for people. And it's, as it says, personal income tax. So as long as you have income coming, as long as you're generating money, you will going to have to pay tax on that income. And then a third thing is the VAT.
Hmm.
And as we talked about, the VAT is a consumer tax. Okay, it's not a it's not an income tax, it's a service tax, and it's taxed on the last person that's buying the service or the product. Okay, so kind of three different areas of costs.
Thank you for sharing this. And from a cost perspective, I want to share what I paid when I was a company owner. So my accountant was 260 euros a month. And then my social security, I believe it was 305 euros per month. And like that, those were the basic expenses of my business every month. Of course, we had the quarterly tax, we had an annual tax that the company had to pay. But when you're hearing like all of these things, VAT, social security, you're probably, as someone who doesn't live in Portugal, you think you're going to be spending thousands. You spend about 600 a month, which is incredible.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to talk about, because I experienced this a lot when I was first starting out my company, is because so many people are misinformed about how VAT works in Portugal. A lot of people, I would like hire people for services, like someone who is in social media, someone who could like run errands for my studio, and they would be like, "Oh, I don't have to pay your VAT." And this happened a lot. And I just want to kind of like do a little myth buster here, because they actually, like, if it's on the invoice, which VAT is always on a Portuguese invoice, you have to pay the VAT. And a lot of times it's because they think that, like, because they're not hired as an employee of your company, they're still providing a service. And like Raquel shared earlier, they are paying the VAT because like they're the last person like consuming that. So can you talk a little bit about that and like what to do in those situations? Because I found myself in those situations a lot, and then I'd have to like get my accountant involved and my lawyer involved just to get someone to pay like 100 euros for something.
That's it's very, very important point, Britt. I'm glad you brought that up because I want to get this really clear. It's a consumer tax. So it's on your clients, whether it's a service or a product or strawberries, it's, on the final consumer. Now, what happens is, and let me point out this situation before, continuing when you're a freelancer under the 15K a year mark, you don't have to charge VAT. That means that your client won't pay VAT, okay? But that's just because you're in a situation where you don't, it's because of simplicity, okay? It's because you're making under 15K, it's you don't even need to go through VAT filing and all of that. So it's for simplicity's sake. So those people are exempt from VAT. And what I always say is, even if you start out as VAT exempt, always consider the 23% on your final price tag, because once you go over the 15K mark, and we always hope that you will, if you don't charge VAT and then suddenly you're going to put 23% more on your price tag, your clients are going to go exactly like you say. Now, why am I going to pay your VAT? No, so right off the bat, even if this is like a huge,
Like an issue.
an issue. And I want really to advise people, even if you're VAT exempt, charge your clients as if you weren't. So as if you were to pay 23% out of their price to the government. Because once you are going to charge VAT, they won't notice because your price will still be the same. And so for the time that you were exempt, that money is yours, and that's fine. Now, what usually happens in Portugal, and this has a little bit to do with trying to evade taxes,
Uh,
is sometimes people who provide services are like, and you'll get a lot of that, in a lot of different businesses. Do you want an invoice or not? And this is because exactly what you were saying. So if you don't write an invoice, it's a completely illegal transaction, of course. It's not a business transaction, but because it doesn't exist in terms of business and in terms of tax, you're not going to pay corporate income tax or personal income tax, and you're not going to be bothered by VAT. When clients figure out that the VAT is on them, sometimes they try to get you to not charge the VAT. So like, oh, I don't need an invoice, so don't bother with that. because then they know that if you don't have to charge the VAT, it's 23% less. Uh,
Okay.
but the 20%, if we're talking about legally, selling something, some product, some service, whether it is a freelancing or a company, you need to invoice. And by the way, you cannot have an invoice in a simple piece of paper. So forget QuickBooks, freaking QuickBooks. Okay. Just let it go. It doesn't work here in Portugal. You have to have a certified software that is linked to the tax authorities. Now,
Can
if you're a
I
freelancer,
can I pause you real quick?
yes,
So when Raquel says like get rid of QuickBooks, get rid of like creating an invoice on a Google Doc, this is real life. And
yeah,
you can either create an invoice through the tax authority website, correct? Or
yes,
there's the service I use that my accountant Pedro approved of is called Maloney, and it's for people who speak multiple languages. So if you're not coming from the US, but you're coming from another EU country, Maloney might be easier for you based on your language, and it's legally approved by Portugal to
yeah,
use. Other things that Portugal approves, you're allowed to use bank transfer, you're allowed to use Wise, which is a bank transfer
yeah.
application, and you're allowed to use PayPal. And when we say like a normal bank transfer, that means MBWay or Revolut. These are all legal in Portugal, but you can't be using Venmo in Portugal. And Venmo is like a bank transfer app that's only for Americans. But just so we're clear, Portugal is very strict on the applications that are allowed to transfer money and the invoicing systems. Continue, Raquel.
No, great point. Revolut also works. Revolut, meanwhile, has a European license and actually just opened the Portuguese license. So all of that is completely doable. But that invoice, once it exists, it's going to have that VAT there, unless you're exempt again with that exception. So a lot of times it's not even you, it's your client that goes, "Oh, I don't really need an invoice," because they know that if you don't write them an invoice, then they're not going to pay VAT. Now, red flag, because uh, i- yes, Portugal can be a very formal and a very, documental. There's a lot of paperwork, a lot of filing. But on the one side, everything is connected. So as soon as you write an invoice, the system knows that that customer paid you for that service. And for instance, for certain types of businesses, and gyms is necessarily one of them, as pets, as car repairman shops, and all of that, you actually have IRS deductions. So if you do ask for an invoice for these types of services, even hairdressers, at the end of the year, when you're paying your tax, you will have deductions because you have invoices that were issued in your name. So this is a way that the government has to incentivize people to request that invoice, because then they get a deduction at the end of the year. But the important thing is for clients and for service providers, it's a guarantee. So when you have a piece of paper, it means that you provided a service, or there's some kind of evidence of proof that there was an exchange of service. You don't need a written contract every time you're going to give a class, but it's important to have something. In
Yeah.
case something happens, it's important to have something. Um, and so don't be afraid of the VAT or the invoicing system. As Brita, as you were saying, there's simpler systems. You can have help. You can have help from your accountant. The tax portal works wonders. You don't need to pay anything extra. It's there. You just need to learn how to use it, and you can issue your invoices there, and you'll see, the amount of VAT that you own. It accumulates. It's there. It's very practical. So there's a lot of bureaucracy, but at the same time, because everything is connected, there's a lot less work at the end of the year when you're paying your taxes, because everything is there already. So the VAT thing is the final consumer tax, okay? And you, as a service provider or as a product seller, you are obligated to issue invoices with it in it.
And for my yoga teachers who are listening to this, who are like, oh my God, I don't know how to do all these taxes, something that's going to incentivize you to use this is what I love about these like invoicing systems is it's required to have your client's email and it's a CRM. So all these clients who come to your yoga studio or take your online classes, you can then download all their emails and upload it to your email system. So they're now on your email list that you can funnel them into taking your yoga teacher trainings, your retreats, like coming to your yoga studio workshops, things like this. So, from a yoga perspective, that's how I want you to see it. So, I just want to backtrack real quick. So, I decided I'm going to move to Portugal. I meet Raquel. She's a badass. And I'm like, Raquel, I want to go open a yoga studio or a dance studio. And Raquel is going to get my NIF from me, which is my Portuguese tax number. Let's say that I want the studio to be a company so I can hire other yoga teachers, AKA other employees. Raquel is going to help me with that. So I get those two things set up. I have my NIF, I have my company opening. I'm going to open with my personal bank account that I would already have. Raquel's going to refer me to Pedro to get my accountant who's going to help me open up my business bank account. I do recommend, if you are not a Portuguese speaker, to have either your accountant or your lawyer on the phone with the bank or to come with you to the bank because it does get a little complicated. I feel that was a mistake that I made because I was really young and just didn't know. So I have all those things set up. I get my invoicing set up either through Maloney or through the actual Portuguese tax system. Now I am ready to look at spaces. What do I do? Because I remember I found like a realtor who is definitely a scam artist who was just like woke up from a nap and decided they're going to be a realtor in Portugal. And that's not how it works. So I think I started looking on like Idealista and then I ended up finding like an actual real estate company who I definitely trust now. They're based in Cascais. But who do I need to contact? Of like, I don't want to open a restaurant. Like I want to open a gym space, or maybe it's like someone's shutting down their hotel and they want to just like do a little switch key operation. Where do I even go to look for spaces in Portugal?
You, first of all, to have a real estate license, unfortunately, is not that difficult at all. It's just a registration. You know, you need to have a clean criminal record, but that's about it. So you don't need special training. You don't need anything. And real estate agencies only need to have the agency registered. So all of the agents that are working under the agency don't need to have to be registered. They, it's really a completely unregulated market. And that's why it's like, as we say in Portuguese, vale tudo menos arrancar olhos. So everything is game. There's a lot of scam artists, a lot of, people unfortunately taking advantage of that. And Idealista and other websites out there are also a hunting ground for scam artists because, they put wonderful pictures at wonderful prices and then, oh, it's you're in a hurry because you really want to rent that space, and you just need to send me a deposit. There it goes. And that happened to me, eh? That happened to me. It's not an expat thing. That happened to me. So be very aware. That is why I actually started with the real estate licensing as well, because I didn't trust other people to serve my clients in terms of real estate. So I wanted to be the one to look at spaces and go and see and talk to the agencies that had the spaces. Uh, because a lot of times people from Idealista, they don't even answer the phone. If they see a foreign number on the phone, they just don't answer. Like 2 days ago, I had that issue. A couple of clients of mine were wanting an office space. They're influencers, they're the unretirees, and they were wanting an office space, and the number there just wasn't. They weren't responding. There was no response. They weren't answering the phone, and they asked me for help, and I could get the property owner on the phone. They went and see the property. Everything was discussed because the person was Portuguese. They're not comfortable with people that are not Portuguese speaking. And so you really need a local person. If you have someone that you trust, like you do, go use that person. If not, have someone that you trust. help you with this, help you contact the property owners, the agencies, because it's really a hunting ground for bad people. And I always recommend, for instance, that's also why I started to do this, is because Cascais is one thing. Oh, I'm gonna have a studio in Cascais. Cascais is really big, so there's good areas and there's bad areas. And if you really don't know the area, if you really don't know Cascais, you can get, once stopped a client from buying a 3 million house because it was on the wrong street. And I was like, "Have you been here?" "No, but it's a great listing. I saw tons of pictures and videos." And I was like, "No, you are not going to buy that house in that street because that's like 10 meters away from a lousy place,
Yeah.
and if you're not there, you don't know these things. So you really need someone that you trust to help you with the real estate thing. And remember, it's really untrained personnel. You don't require a lot of guarantees to be an agency. So really beware of the person that you use. Have someone that you trust. Ask people that you trust to give you, referrals for people. So the way you go about it is either you go to an agency as a buyer's agent,
Mhm.
as a buyer, excuse me, or you go to Idealista and you start looking around and contacting people yourself. I advise that you have a buyer's agent like I am to do that work for you. Again, I will do the scouting, I will do the contacting of all the all the properties, and then I'll give you a list of 3 places. I'll get rid of everything that's not good and then present you with, okay, these are the 3 places that I'm comfortable with presenting you. And then we can go, see those 3 places. I'll be there, as an interpreter, as a bridge between the Portuguese owner or
Yes.
whatever and you. And you can talk about utilities, you can talk about prices, conditions, all of these particular things that you need to know when you're renting a space. So go do that and use a buyer's agent or whatever of your trust. Now, you can either rent or buy, as we've said, but then there's a very important thing. When you rent or buy a commercial space, because, if it's a studio or a business, it's going to need to be a commercial state property or a shop or whatever, or a restaurant. So that's a
Mhm.
commercial space. It's a space that's going to be used for a business. You're going to need licensing. Okay, so depending on the activity, let's say it's a restaurant, you need a lot of licenses. You need a license with the entity that regulates that activity. You need, fire and health and safety hazard, whatever certificates. You need, there's a lot of regulation about the food and the containers and how you store food and whatever it is. And so, depending on the type of business, and for instance, a proper studio does require some type of licensing. It does require that you talk to the local town hall and say, look, I'm opening a gym in this location. So it's a mere communication uh, in the town hall, but you do need to do that. And there are certain requirements in terms of space, in terms of how many students can fit into a space, all of that. If you're going to have locker rooms and bathrooms and this and that, if you have a disability, entrances and all of that. So there's a bit of regulation that you need to take into account. So have a lawyer with you, have a consultant with you. There's a lot of bureaucracy that you really need to pay attention to when you're opening any kind of business. So it can be really simple, and I did that like 2 or 3 months ago. I opened a Pilates studio for my clients, and I was like 200% compliant. I think I was pestering the town hall at a given time, because I just really wanted to make sure that everything was in place. So I was like getting emails from them saying, no, it's okay to open. just to be, 200% sure that everything was okay and that there would be no fines, because it's quite easy, because it's just a communication, so you can open the door and start the activity. But then the trouble is the inspections. So if they see something open up, then they're going to inspect, and then you have to have everything in order. I am really sorry that I'm taking so much time talking, but I
No, you're
want to
good.
say something about what you said, which is employing someone.
Yes. Can we talk about real quick, like, for example, if I want to hire a social media manager for my studio versus a team of 5 teachers who are teaching 7 days a week? A social
Yes.
media manager, for example, for me was a service provider because they didn't need to be in my studio. I could just send them content versus hiring teachers who are physically going to be in my space. What is the difference?
You can do both in both cases. So it's not because they're physically present at the classes that they cannot be service providers. They can. And like that client that I have that is a freelancer and goes to several spaces, he's a freelancer. So he writes his invoice to the studio owner or whatever. So it doesn't have connection with that. The issue is those service providers, they can either be contractors or service providers. So there be freelancers, or they're going to have a company, or they're going to be your employees. And when they're your employees, there's a lot of responsibility with actually hiring someone for your company as an employee. So,
Real
uh,
quick, for
yeah,
if you're opening a Pilates studio, a dance studio, a yoga studio, your employees. So if I'm the studio owner, it doesn't mean I'm going to be the studio manager. So my employees could be studio manager, assistant manager, a janitor who needs to be there 5 days out of the 7 days of the week. Um, the actual, not the sub list, like the people who are occasionally subbing, I would do that as a service provider. But if I had someone teaching every Monday and Friday, the 7 a.m. yin class, that's an employee. Continue.
for sure, for sure. So, and all of those people can be freelancers or contractors, so service providers, because they will have a company, or employees. Now, when someone is your employee, there's a lot of responsibility. Again, it's a socialist country. There's a lot of protection for the worker. So, first, cultural shock, you'll need to pay 14 salaries in 1 year. Surprise! It's not 12. You're going to need to pay 14 salaries in 1 year. And everybody's shocked with it, but it is what it is. One is a vacation bonus and another is a Christmas bonus. Another thing, you're going to give that person at least 22 days vacation. And so that means that they won't work for a full month,
It will
right?
be the
And
month of
you're
August, just so we're
and
clear.
you're paying 14 months, okay? So it's difficult. And remember, we talked earlier about this. So you, as an employer, have to pay 23.75% of their Social Security, and the employee has to pay 11% of Social Security. None of these costs exist when you're hiring a freelancer, because that freelancer will issue your invoice and that's your final price. That's the only thing that you'll pay. You won't need to worry about 13 month, 14 month, vacation, insurance, nothing. You won't need to worry about anything because those people are not your employees. So when you hire someone to be your employee, there's a lot of responsibility. You need to there's labor conditions, that you have to make sure that are there: hygiene, safety, mandatory insurance for them, accidents at the workplace policy. um, there's so again, and the one thing that's very, very important, it's really not easy to fire people in Portugal. They need almost like to, I don't know, go crazy around the premises for you to be able to fire them. And even then, there's a whole process that has to be executed before that person leaves your company. So if I always recommend at the start, don't employ people right away. First go through freelancers, people that have companies and that can issue invoices from companies. If you really must, if you're at a stage where you really trust that person, and then you're okay, I'm going to hire this person. you can, on your employment contract, on their employment contract, have a trial period. Okay. Do that, because that's an additional period where you can test the waters and see if you really like that person. So there's a lot of things that you can go ahead, go ahead.
How long is the trial period?
It depends on the time of the contract, because you can have 1-year contracts, or you can have contracts that don't end, don't have a specific end. And so it can go from 15, 30 days of trial period to longer trial periods. The important thing is, also, before starting with a contract that doesn't have a deadline, be sure to do, a 1-year contract that then can be renewed. It can't be renewed forever. Of course, there's a limitation, because if you keep continuing to renew that, then it means that they should be your employee full time. So, you can only do that for a number of times.
So, something I want to share about this as a yoga studio owner and as someone who has managed yoga studios, who has learned a lot of lessons about hiring, both in Portugal and in the United States. If you're going to open a space in Portugal and you want to hire employees, Raquel mentioned how like you're paying for 14 months for an employee. I would require upon interview, number one, to ask them, how long are you in the country for? Because Portugal is such an in and out place due to it being an ocean country. It's a place for holidays. And that's like your first answer. If they're just there for 6 months, for 90 days, I would hire them as a service person, not as an employee. If they say, oh, I'm living in Portugal, require them to show you their lease, and not a sublease, but like an actual lease that is authorized through the tax authority that proves that they are going to be, that they have some kind of stability staying in Portugal, because they could tell you one thing and their legal situation is something totally different, and then you screw yourself over. So really just make sure everything is documented. I actually never hired employees for my studio. I was the one who was teaching most of the classes, and when I had people teaching in my studio, it was a partnership. So they were teaching with me. I'm just someone who's very protective of my space. So I want to be on site when other people are there. But really just make sure that everything is legitimate before you decide to go and hire. I'm Portuguese for people who don't know or who don't know my last name, and my whole family is in Portugal. And one of my best friends, he works for an advertising agency, and he's been an employee for this company for like his whole life. I'm not even exaggerating, probably for like 30 years minimum. And like it is the best job of his life because there's so many requirements to treat the people well, and it's almost impossible to fire people. And he's not someone who would like need to get fired, but I've learned a lot of business lessons just from him being an employee for a Portuguese company well before I even decided I was going to open a company. So another good idea is like maybe ask to shadow someone who has a Portuguese company and like offer to volunteer for a day or to intern for a month, just to see if this is something you even want to do, because it is different from a bureaucratic standpoint when you have a company in Portugal.
It's a huge commitment. And your employees, you're going to have, as a company, you're going to need to register them in the Social Security as your employees. And so you as an employee, you can check, you can go to the Segurança Social Direta, which is like the Social Security portal, and you can check if your employer is actually paying their share of Social Security and
Yeah.
your share of Social Security, because those 11%, they are taken automatically off of your salary sheet, so you don't even see them. And so it happened, it's not common at all, but it does happen that some employees, some employers, you think that they're making your contributions for Social Security, and you go and see, and they haven't done anything. So if you're an employee, you can check the contributions that your company has made on your behalf and on their behalf on Social Security Direct, which is a portal of Social Security. You can check that, and you should check that. So even a commitment like that, so you need to register your employee with the Social Security, because every month Social Security will require you to pay their Social Security. And so it is, Britta, like you said, it is a huge commitment. I was an employee of the bank for 20 years, so it's not uncommon at all for people in Portugal to be employees for years and years and years because the culture is, especially people in their 30 plus 40s, our parents' mindset was always telling us you need to get a job, you need to, get inside a company because it's a safe job, because you won't be
Yes.
fired, because you'll have a salary, a fixed salary, and all of that. And so there's a lot of people from our age, 20 somethings, that that are going
Yes.
to be employees and that have been working for a lot of time in the same company. So, 18 years here, so 5 years before that in another company. Um, when you hire someone, it usually is a lengthy commitment, a time commitment. Even for your business, it means that the business is going to be able to stand that financial commitment of hiring someone because you're going, again, 14
Yes.
salaries, vacation, all of that. So really take care.
Two more questions and then we're going to wrap it up. The first one is based on finding a space. And you mentioned this a little bit about like you're able to look up if your employer is paying your social security. When you're looking at a space, it is required if you're renting the landlord to have the lease registered with the tax authority. And I probably looked at 10 spaces before I found my space. And the reason I ended up choosing between two, because all the other ones I looked at, the landlords refused to register with the tax authority, which is illegal, super illegal, and they will get caught. They get caught every time, I promise you. But what happens if I find myself in a situation, because I don't know anything about Portugal or how it works, and I find this beautiful space, I pay, for example, it's also illegal if they're like, oh, well, it's 6 months of rent up front. That's against the law in Portugal. And a lot of times they'll be like, fine, I have 10 other people who want it. That's illegal. So, number one, don't be working with landlords who require 6 months of rent up front. Do you know what the exact, I think for me, I had to pay a month of rent and then like a a deposit.
The most that you can require is at the end, it's going to be 5 months. So it's the first month, two deposits, and two upfront rents. That's the maximum that they can request. So at the end of the day, it's going to be five rents because it's the first month, and then two deposits and two upfront rents. That's it. I've seen cases where people demanded 1 year of upfront paid rent. It's insane.
It's illegal
And
too.
they didn't issue, receipts, so
Yeah.
it
And
was
if you
insane.
don't, let's say that you're someone who this happens to you and you are in the process of getting your visa. Well, guess what? When you go to your AMA appointment, they're going to want receipts proving that you have lived in a country or that you're the company owner of a space. And if you don't have those receipts, you cannot get your visa. So, like, this is really important. I would say before you even take the time to go look at a space, like, require that the landlord shows proof that this space is registered with the tax authority, and you even have the legal right to report them if they don't,
Oh,
because that
yeah.
means, and I've actually done that before because it happened to like one of my friends and she almost got screwed over. So it's like really be cognizant of that. And my other question, it was about that. The employee,
Just
go ahead.
don't forget what you were about to say. If you're a freelancer or a company owner, that can count as a cost, but it
Hmm.
can only count as a cost when you have the receipts, when you have the invoices when everything is registered with the tax authority. One more
Yes.
reason for everything to be legit.
And I remember my first space in Portugal, it was just my apartment, and my landlord registered his business at my apartment and he didn't register it through the tax authority, and the police came to my door, and, like, it was, like, one of the scariest days of my life, and, like, I didn't speak Portuguese yet, and I had to call him, and, like, he didn't pay his taxes, and it's like they do find out, and they find out quickly because Portuguese people don't mess around when it comes to taxes that need to be paid, so just make sure that that is all registered, and if you have no idea how to do that, then you have Raquel, and we're kind of, like, through this story. We have our company registered, we have our bank account, we have our accountant, we have Raquel who helped us with our NIF, we found a space that Raquel helped us with. Now it's we can open this space? Are there any requirements if it's like it's the week of my studio opening or the week of my gym opening? Is there any last thing I need to check off my list?
There's, apart from the licensing itself to open the door to your studio, so we've seen with the city hall, there's the fire and hazard, study that has to be done. You have to have a certification on the wall that says that those premises have a study of fire hazard and such, and that you have, all that you need to have in order to prevent fires. You also need to remember, hire correctly everybody that's going to work in your store or in your studio. You will need to have a complaints book. This is very
Right.
important. So
I
every
love this.
business needs a complaints book, and it's a physical book, and actually an actual physical A4 book with a red cover, that you it's mandatory to have in your store. Every thing that is open to the public has to have one. And this is for the consumers. If they have a complaint, they can write in that book, and that a copy of it has to be sent to the regulatory authority of that particular business. So it's going to be analyzed by the regulatory entity. So
Pretty
it's kind of a
serious.
big thing. Even if it's an online store, there is a version of the complaints book, virtual complaints book. Okay, so even if it's just online, you need to register your complaints book online. So it's going to be virtual, but it's still going to be there. If you're playing music, you will need a license because you're playing music, and so you have to consider the rights of songwriters and all of that. So
Yoga
all
teachers, pay attention to this. For all my playlist junkies, this is really
Yes,
important.
because if people don't are not aware of this, but if you want to play music in a commercial, space, for business, you do need a license. Okay, you really do need a license. And and then of course, if you have websites, privacy policies, terms and conditions, take a look at the contracts that you're going to have with your client. Really take a look at obligations and what you need to have in that contract. That if you have like a rule book of the space, give a copy of that rule book to the client, because they need to be aware of what they can and what they cannot do in their space. It's going to save you a lot of trouble if people know, what they can and what they cannot do in the space. Um, and I think it's just starting a business.
I love this. And when Raquel was saying about something for your clients to sign, she's talking about a waiver, which all studio owners should have. And this is a waiver from on mine. I'll actually link it in the show notes. But if anyone had the flu or COVID, because the flu was just so rampant in Portugal, they were not allowed in my yoga studio. I would either refund them or let them come to another class. There's also many clauses and it's very, in my waiver, it's very easy to read, but it's very clear that they are not allowed to sue me. It's clear that I'm insured. I also put on there that I give optional hands-on adjustments, meaning the student has to give me verbal consent and written consent if I put my hands on them, because we do that in yoga. We give hands-on adjustments. So I will link that in the show notes just so yoga teachers and studios can have that. Also, I'm going to add a Google business. Something I learned when I had a studio in Portugal is that like 90% of people found me through Google. So get your Google business set up, and it's a place where people can write you reviews as well.
Yes, didn't even think of that. Hugely important. Um, if depending on the size, you will need to have an operations manual as well, and you'll need a technical director to sign it. And this technical director needs to have either a degree in sports or whatever, or have an equivalence in other country to that technical ability to sign the operations manual of a studio. Of course, we're talking about something big right now, that it's not just a studio, it's going to be a gym. So depending on the space that it has, the bigger it gets, the bigger the requirements are. And so you'll need a technical director. You need to have insurances, civil liability insurances for everybody that sets foot in your gym. So of course, it all depends also on the space. If you have like one room. You're not gonna, you don't need an operations manual signed by a technical director. But as you grow, be mindful that the requirements will also be more demanding, and they will increase. So be aware of that. And again, baby steps, and have someone alongside you to check all of these things up, because you need to concentrate and focus on getting clients or giving classes, those really important things. So you need someone else to take care of these things.
Raquel is your girl for that. And I just want to say thank you, Raquel, for being on the podcast today. If I am a wellness entrepreneur who is very interested in opening up some kind of wellness space in Portugal, how can I get in touch with you? Where can I find you?
Well, you can find me through my website, so lighthouseconsulting.pt. You can have my socials. It's also Lighthouse Consulting, Raquel, I think, Lighthouse Consulting. I'm sure you'll put, the
Yeah.
links. I have a LinkedIn page. I have a TikTok page. I have a Facebook page, Instagram, all of that. I also have a newsletter, so everybody that goes to my website can register to the newsletter. And I also have a YouTube channel. You are welcome to check that out as well, because there's a podcast. There's a lot of different episodes concerning business and what you need to have a business. A lot of the things that we talked about here are there. So if you're curious about having a business in Portugal, go check out my YouTube channel, because there's a lot of interesting content that you can use and that may be useful for you. So lighthouseconsulting.pt.
Incredible. I will put all of this in the show notes. I will also link your YouTube. This is going to go up on YouTube as well, so we can connect there. Thank you for being on here. This has been the most incredible, informative session for anyone who is very serious about opening a space in Portugal. I would say that there needs to be more yoga, there needs to be more dance, there needs to just be more exercise options. So there is plenty of room for this to happen in Portugal. And when you're ready to do that, you're going to hit up Raquel. Thank you. Thank you for being on here. You're just the best. And thank you for everyone
Thank
who's
you.
listening in today. If you are a women-run business and want to be featured as a commercial on the Yes podcast, then send an email to britta@brittamareda.com or check the show notes to get the details. Thank you for listening to the Your Entrepreneurship School podcast. If funding your life abroad sounds like something you want to do, then check out the show notes to find out ways we can work together. If you feel called to leave a review, then you can find me on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. I'll see you on our next episode, where we will expand our business bank accounts in brilliance without settling for a life that tames us, all while saying yes to our wildest dreams.